Tonight, I am presenting three amazing artists that were in my masterclass earlier this year. I so appreciate how hard they work and the kind of work they make. It's really compelling and significant. So tonight we are going to start with Barbara Boissevain. Barbara, you can come on. And I'm going to read your bio. Barbara is a visual artist and photographer from Silicon Valley who explores and documents environmental and social justice issues. Boissevain studied painting at the Parsons School of Design in New York and then went on to receive her BFA in photography from the San Francisco Art Institute and an MFA in photography from San Jose State University. In 2009, she was awarded the Best of ASMP from the American Society of Media Photographers. Her work has been exhibited internationally in solo and group exhibitions in the US and Europe. These include, you're going to have to correct me, Mémoire d'Avenir in Paris, France, the Photographic Center Northwest, Seattle, the Institute of Contemporary Art, San Jose, Gallery Numero 5 in Arles, and the Academy of Fine Arts in Krakow, Poland. Her work has been published in numerous publications, including Lens Scratch and the American Scholar. Her work was featured on NPR and the PBS show Something Beautiful. She published Children of the Rainbow in 2009, a book and traveling exhibition that documents humanitarian problems due to climate change, facing the Quichua, is that right?
Yeah,
Quechua communities in Peru. Her art has been acquired by numerous public and private collections around the world, including the Google Corporate Collection. For the past 7 years, she was an artist in residence with the city of Palo Alto's Caberly Artist Studio Program in Palo Alto, California. In 2018, she was awarded an artist in residency in France at Gallery Huit in Arles in conjunction with the Les Contrées de la my French is so terrible, Photographie Festival. And in July of 2011 for a solo residency through Lear Arts International Residency Program. Welcome, Barbara. I know the audience is really going to be wowed and enjoy your talk so much. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Aline. Okay, awesome. So first off, I'd like to thank Aline and the LACP for this fabulous opportunity to share my work with a wider audience and our larger photo community. It has been a long journey developing my work to include my personal experience together with pressing issues going on in our environment. Let's get started. So I am the rare species of Californian that grew up in the Silicon Valley in a town that is now synonymous with a certain red fruit and the icon Steve Jobs. But I remember when the South Bay had thousands of orchards where my sister and I played in as children. I would like to take a moment to mention that the Ohlone people were the first nation of people to live in the Bay Area and lived in harmony with this land hundreds of years before my ancestors set foot on this continent. My parents moved to California from the Midwest when I was 6 years old. At that time, this part of the Bay Area was known as the Valley of Heart's Delight. As a child, I remember spending endless days roaming and building forts in the orchards with my friends. Even before the tech came to the valley, there were environmental issues as I played in these orchards. I was unaware that they had been sprayed with DDT and other toxic chemical compounds. I grew up in tandem with the tech industry in the 70s and 80s, which was starting up all around us. My parents were both remarkable nerds. Don't ask me how they produced an artist. My dad was a PhD who worked at NASA, and my mom was a math professor who became a computer programmer after moving to the Valley. Despite my parents' proclivities, they enrolled me in art lessons at local art museums, including the De Young in San Francisco, where I started taking classes when I was 14. It was there that I saw the work of Richard Diebenkorn, whose aerial perspectives that abstracted the Bay Area topography really spoke to me. I started to realize that I wanted to immerse myself in art and felt the need to experience life outside the technology bubble of the Silicon Valley. This is what propelled me like a rocket to New York, where I started at Parsons School of Design in 1988. I started out in art school primarily studying painting, but this all changed in 1991 when, on a trip to Paris, I saw Sebastião Salgado's exhibit Workers at the Palais de Tokyo. The idea of using photography in the service of social and political advocacy was not new to me. But this idea, combined with the formal qualities of his images and his extraordinary use of available light, really resonated with me. Discovering his work was a pivotal moment. I wound up switching mediums and moving back to San Francisco to study photography at the San Francisco Art Institute, where I got my BFA in 1994. I was lucky enough to study with some incredible photographers, including Perkle Jones. Perkle was a protege of Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams and was very nurturing to me as a developing young photographer. He was very ecumenical in his approach to teaching and encouraged me to follow my instincts. So after being awarded the Sobel Memorial Scholarship, I spent a semester in northern Greece photographing Greek Muslim gypsy women for my senior thesis project. I graduated with a BFA and later enrolled in San Jose State's MFA program in photography, where David Meisel taught our graduate seminar one semester. I was deeply inspired by his cartographic works. He talked about the apocalyptic sublime and the idea that you can draw the viewer in with startling beauty and then astound them by revealing what they are actually looking at. This was a significant idea for me in the creation of my next series of projects. My real wake-up call to the environmental issues in the Bay came in 2005 when I was living in Mountain View, California, and 8 months pregnant with my second daughter, Giselle. I got a letter from the government informing me about a Superfund cleanup in my neighborhood. Superfund is EPA lingo for a contaminated and hazardous waste site. At the time, I knew nothing about this toxic plume of carcinogen known as TCE or trichloroethylene that was underneath my home. I set out to document and research vapor intrusion, the means by which air inside our homes becomes contaminated. While doing this research, I felt a little like Alice in Wonderland, where over and over again, I found myself going down another rabbit hole. The San Francisco Bay leads the nation in environmental awareness, yet it is among the most polluted regions in the country. In 2010, I started this body of work titled Big Dirty Secrets, which includes 3 main sites, all of which adversely impact the communities and ecosystems in their vicinity. The first site I documented is the cement factory in Cupertino that is located only 2 miles from my childhood home. In this series, I combine text and image in different ways, allowing the viewer to discover the text hidden within these sites, mimicking the ways in which information about the true level of toxicity is obscured and hidden from the public. This text was excerpted from the EPA website the San Jose Mercury News, and the Sierra Club. The Santa Cruz Mountains contain high levels of mercury dust, and it is this dust that is being stirred up and is toxic to the community living in close proximity to the factory. There are clusters of lung cancer and birth defects in the neighborhood fence line with this factory. Looking at the image on the upper left, you can see how close the cement factory is to the dense population just on the other side of the ridge, where lies the headquarters of Apple. While beautiful, this image on the right shows how scarred the earth is after extraction of the raw materials for cement. After decades of pressure from environmental activists, I'm happy to report that just recently, the Cupertino City Council voted to facilitate the purchase of this factory by a conservation organization, and the factory will finally be shut down. Like many people who grew up in the South Bay, I have a shared history with Moffett Field, the largest Superfund site in California. Moffett Field is home to the iconic Hangar 1, a colossal structure that covers over 8 acres and is one of the largest freestanding structures in the world. As I mentioned earlier, my father worked for NASA as an aerospace engineer for over 33 years. And as a small child, I rode up and down in hot air balloons inside the hangar during annual holiday parties. I remember experiencing the incredible vastness of the space known to produce its own weather systems, including rain and fog. In 2010, Hangar 1 was found to be leaking toxic chemicals into the San Francisco Bay, resulting in a biological die-off of the wetlands in close proximity to the hangar. The lower right is a shot of me in a 2-person helicopter when I went up to take the aerial photographs that show evidence of toxic algae at the end of the runway next to the hangar. The removal of the toxic outside skin from the hangar began in 2011, as it was found to contain PCBs, lead, and asbestos. In this shot, a hanging glass piece, I chose to combine archival inkjet prints with sand-blasted etched glass. Vaporous text etched in the overlaid glass underneath the hangar image suggests the hidden toxicity that exists below ground level. I chose to title this series Ghost Hangar because of losing my father to a rare form of cancer in 2009. My next project was in the East Bay, where after hearing about the August 6, 2012 fire at the Chevron oil refinery in Richmond that sent 15,000 people to the emergency rooms, as documented by Kaiser Permanente, I decided to spend 8 months with community members documenting the lives of Richmond residents. To learn more about this project and see a video documenting the installation where I projected my images on the surface of oil inside of 50-gallon oil drums, please visit the Vimeo link I've included on this slide. The installation was shown at the UFRAP Museum in 2016. In 2010, while flying over the Bay to photograph for my Big Dirty Secrets series, I discovered something quite magical and beautiful taking place in the Bay. After years of investigating toxicity, I was thrilled to find an opportunity to document something positive happening in the environment. For over a decade now, I've been photographing the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, the largest wetlands restoration program on the West Coast. I'm currently working on a book called Salt of the Earth that will be the culmination of this project and will be published next year. These aerial shots are of industrial salt ponds that have existed in the South Bay since the 1800s. They are characterized by environmentalists as having taken away the lungs of the bay. For over 100 years, they were used to produce salt for icy roads and other industrial purposes. The San Francisco Bay is home to the oldest and densest urban settlements in the American West. Photographing this project for more than a decade, I have captured thousands of images and have learned quite a bit about the limited biodiversity that is a result of the high salinity in these ponds. The apocalyptic oranges and reds are from the carotenoids produced by the specific algae that thrives in this environment. Recently, I began creating formal grids based on the year they were photographed and a common color palette. The greening of the bay, visible in the right grid, happens rather quickly after the levees built to create the ponds are broken and tidal systems are let back in. The biodiversity increases from just 2 organisms to tens of thousands in just a matter of months when the tides are allowed to repopulate these areas. As the dramatic changes in the bay continue, I will add to this series and create more grids documenting the increasing biodiversity of the reclaimed wetlands. Here are a couple images of installations and exhibits where I've had the opportunity to share this work. In 2020, during the pandemic, I began photographing from the ground level several of the salt ponds that are under active restoration. The Ravenswood ponds in Menlo Park are adjacent to the headquarters of Meta, also known as Facebook. Technology workers look out over these ponds from the windows of slick glass buildings, and many of them are not aware of the miraculous transformation taking place in their own backyard. While photographing, my experience of the colors and textures of this already very surreal landscape was heightened after what seemed like many months of sensory deprivation during the lockdown phase of the pandemic. These images reveal human incursions in the landscape, resulting in complex geometries and artifacts due to the limited biodiversity. Zooming in closer to my subject allowed me to reveal the wound-like openings in the earth where signs of new life are just beginning under the water. Nature reclaiming its territory is a potent theme for me, and one that I explore further in other photographic series. The cracked surface of the earth looks almost like an alien planet juxtaposed next to the opulent manufactured structures cocooning the social media company headquarters. In May 2022, I began photographing the Ravenswood Pond underwater and discovered a microcosm infused with hidden beauty. These images uncover a new universe where salt crystals have iterated into congruent forms, creating a foreign landscape. The salt-encrusted shoreline, only a few centimeters high, now suggests Arctic-like mountains of ice and snow. Submerging my camera underwater reveals tiny brine shrimp swimming around the cavernous berg-like salt crystals. Within the immersed world, I was intrigued to find textures and patterns mirroring the ones I had captured when photographing from the air. I took this discovery to be a sign that I had come full circle with this project. Nature reclaiming its territory was explored also in other projects, including a series that I began in 2016 that I've titled "The Trees Will Outlive Us." This body of work is the first chapter of my investigation of what I call the post-apocalyptic sublime. This is an imagined future where human artifacts are the only remains of the Anthropocene. In 2018, I was invited to Arles, France, with the gallerist, by the gallerist Julia Debert for the Galerie 8 artist residency during the Les Rencontres de la Photographie Festival. While I was in France, I spent 6 weeks traveling all over both France and Germany, photographing locations where nature has taken back abandoned human structures. I was interested in photographing locations that were already in the process of decay and transformation. This site in Western Germany is a decommissioned coal factory that is slowly being taken over by forest and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the size of a small city. This space was so big that after 3 days of photographing, I still felt like there was more to explore and go back to photograph. Other sites I photographed were an abandoned chateau in Normandy and an ancient abbey that had been converted into a convalescent hospital. I decided to print these images on Japanese washi paper to highlight the fragility of these relinquished sites. I was delighted to be invited back to France in 2019 to show this body of work at Galerie Numero 5 in Arles, as well as other venues, including Marnay-sur-Seine outside of Paris. This brings me to my most recent work, which is very much in progress and still just developing. This past year, I spent 9 months in France with my husband Philippe and daughter Giselle. The daily onslaught of disturbing news regarding our environment, combined with living in a place with so many layers of history all around me, caused me to think very deeply about our species' relationship to nature and how we have historically seen ourselves in relation to our environment. How did we get to such a perilous moment in our shared history with this planet? This caused an existential crisis for me, and I began to look for answers in the incredible gardens and parks in Paris, where the history of man's relationship with nature is visible around every corner. I found this in the statues, landscapes, and designs that include ancient horticulture going back many centuries. In the giant historical archive at the Jardin des Plantes, I spent hours in the library's collections requesting archival prints hundreds of years old of the very same parks and gardens I was photographing. I'm experimenting to combine the past and present and create new works by compositing these archival prints with my contemporary photographs that are the same subject matter. Many times I will choose the same camera position where the artist who created the print may have stood centuries ago. During one of my explorations, I reflected on a quote by John Muir, where he described the perversity of man's attempt to impose our will on nature. In the Jardin, photographing these magnificent glass houses that contain their own fragile biospheres, I began to see the glass house as a poignant metaphor for our own precarious situation on this fragile little planet. How much longer will it take for us to realize how our destinies are intertwined like the breaths we share in the glass house? And when will it be too late? So thank you for the opportunity to share my work with you this evening and speak about these issues that are very important and close to my heart. I'm hoping to contribute to the larger conversation we need to have in our culture as we prepare for an uncertain future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I forgot to say at the beginning that the audience can put questions for Barbara in the Q&A, and I will read them out to her. And if you think of something after this, I'm certain we can certainly come back at the end and do that too. I so loved you identifying a quality that I have seen in a number of artists' work, including your own, which is the apocalyptic sublime. I think it has so much power to show us something that is remarkable and beautiful and get our attention, and then learn that we are not looking at what we thought we were looking at. So you do that with all of your work so beautifully. I wondered if by any chance Facebook or Apple would be open to having you display some of your projects there that speak to that area. Have you pursued
Yeah,
that at all?
I I have a little bit. I've had more luck with Google, to tell you the truth, than Facebook, and I haven't tried at Apple though. But that would be interesting too. Maybe the Extraction, the cement factory series, because
Yeah,
they're so close to that site.
yeah. And I would assume most people have no idea.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
um,
When I was growing up there, we just heard the trucks kind of going up that Stevens Creek Road up the mountain, but we didn't really even know what was happening behind that ridge. It was pretty crazy.
wow. I also wanted to ask you, in your search for sites where nature is reclaiming itself, how you located those sites in Germany and in France. Is that just word of mouth or?
Yeah, so I was with my husband Philippe, and who's French, and he helped me, with translation because my French is in progress. And we would go to a town. For example, we went to a wonderful town in Normandy called Caen, or Caen, I think it is. It's not Cannes, not the one in the south, but Caen. And that town, we went to the tourist bureau, and we just said, we're looking for these abandoned structure, maybe historic structures that might be under, left, to where nature is taking over. We kind of described what I was looking for. And, usually people were very helpful. And, just through talking to people in town. We also looked at the Urbex. There's a Urbex Urban Explorer website, and that's a great resource for people
Wow,
looking for,
great.
yeah.
Um, I also, this is kind of a technical, but what was the substrate you used for those images that you had on exhibition outdoors?
Yes, so that was a muslin fabric, and I was able to put that fabric directly through my Epson printer. So I have
Wow.
a large
Amazing.
format Epson, yeah, and it actually has a paper backing on the fabric, so it feeds in, and then you peel that paper away, but it prints on the fabric side. And it was really fun because actually there was a rainstorm that happened during that installation, and all of this detritus kind of you know became stuck on the prints, and it was actually added to the quality of the installation. So
Fantastic. Well, you have a comment from Bonnie Blake saying, Barbara, what an amazing talk. Heartening to hear about your progress in some of the areas of about the progress in some areas of the Silicon Valley. Just stunning work. And then another person asked, can you please share again the link of the video that you mentioned? So maybe you can put that
yeah.
in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A for anyone who's interested.
Okay, great. I'll do that.
Wow, thank you, thank you. And if
Thank
anyone
you.
has more questions, feel free to put them in and we'll ask Barbara at the end. All right, we are moving on to Nathalie Seaver. Nathalie is a Los Angeles-based visual artist whose practice uses photography, collage, and mixed media to investigate materiality and memory to reveal unexpected layers of enchantment and splendor found in worlds within her reach. Seaver grew up in New York City and Paris and studied film and theater at Wesleyan University. Her career has included book illustration, creative executive positions in the television and film industry, and fashion design. She is one of the most creative people I know, who literally touches every genre in the art world and succeeds at it. Her art is enhanced and informed by this lifetime connection of working in these visual and tactile fields. Seaver has presented her work extensively in gallery exhibitions in the United States, including the Griffin Museum of Photography, the Southeast Center of Photography, and the New York Center for Photography, as well as Photo Fever in Paris. Seaver has been a Focus Photo finalist at Photo LA, a Critical Mass finalist, and selected for the Chongqing Fresh Summer Edition, and has been featured in the Getty Museum, Iris blog, several lens scratch exhibitions, including an interview highlighting her Deconstructing Beauty series. Welcome, Nathalie. We can't wait to hear your story and see your beautiful work.
Thank you so much, Aline. Hopefully my share screen will work. Give me a moment.
And don't forget to put your questions for Nathalie in the Q&A.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you to Aline Smithson and the LACP for this opportunity to share my work with you. First, a little background history. My French mother met my American father in Paris. He was a writer, editor, and publisher, and she was a violin soloist. Professional opportunities took them to Manhattan, and I spent my childhood in their vibrant artistic world, not aware that many of their friends were luminaries. But that is another story for another time. I grew up shuttling back and forth between the two cities, never completely sure if I was French or American. Sometimes my mother went on tour. While she was away, my brother and I were dropped off to stay at my grandmother's little apartment in Paris. My grandmother was also a violinist and had been the band leader of her own gypsy swing orchestra in the 1940s. That too is another story. Her sheet music was still everywhere in her apartment. I was mystified how little black dots on paper could translate to her hypnotic Tzigane music. Naturally, it made sense for me to pursue the family tradition, but while music remained important to me, my true language was by expressing myself visually. I've always been an artist, and the truth was, playing the violin was very, very uncomfortable. Like many children, I loved fairy tales illustrating mysterious worlds with magical conjurings, which inspired me from an early age to imagine past what I could see and draw and experiment with watercolors myself. In Paris, my grandmother picked us up at our French school, and on our way home, we do the marché, groceries needed for that night's meal. I was always struck by the beautiful floral decorations on so many of these little Paris storefronts, which seemed to invite you to enchanted worlds like those in the storybooks I loved so much. While I was captivated by many aspects of Paris, I missed my mother and father. I was very shy and distracted myself in those picture books, fascinated by the details and the illustrations. I was mesmerized by how they entwined magically to the natural world and loved discovering new details with each viewing, like the flowing drape of patterns and fabrics. Perhaps I connected to those stories because the way I saw the outside world was always blurry, and I was used to navigating the shadows. Sometimes I was not quite sure if what I was seeing was real or imaginary, and I was always bumping into things. When I was 7, I learned that my eyesight was severely compromised. My left eye was not functioning, and I was only using my right eye to see. A very clever doctor prescribed one contact lens to force the dormant eye to be active and begin to work normally. I would be plagued for headaches for many years. Eventually, my eyesight improved enough to allow me to navigate more normally. That grating glass contact lens was replaced by equally dreaded eyeglasses, many of which I did my best to lose, much to my parents' dismay. I was most at ease, glasses off, with my head in a book or leaning in close to a piece of paper, imagining and drawing. I spent my high school years spending hours discovering and mesmerized by old movies in the intense, energetic, and noisy New York City, and constantly doodling in the margins of my schoolwork. I found myself yearning for the soothing respite of the countryside. I began to compulsively paint tiny landscapes on index cards and kept them in my school notebooks. Something about seeing these expansive vistas of nature was always a restorative tonic. One day, my dad brought home an SX70 Polaroid camera. This device was a revelation. Instant pictures, amazing. When he lent it to me one afternoon, I accidentally created a double exposure and became fascinated by the possibilities of creating an imagined reality with film instead of pen and ink. When a photographer friend of my parents invited me to visit his studio, I was amazed to see the vast space and all the equipment, but it was far more complicated than our SX70. Overwhelmed, I didn't really connect with how it all came together. For a brief time, I found it more appealing to be in front of the camera as a subject of a photo. I concentrated instead on my drawing, and I had the good fortune to get professional illustration work early on. When I was expected to Wesleyan University, I arrived at the small bucolic campus, eager to study film there. Although I found inspirational professors and forged some friendships, I never felt quite at home in the astonishingly dreary Middletown, Connecticut. I impulsively applied for a semester in Paris. Although it had been several years since I'd been back in France, I was struck by the reassuring sense of returning home and finally being in the right place. While studying in Paris, I found new friends working in film production. I gave English lessons to French actors and learned how to create subtitles, which led to other odd jobs in the French film world, including being cast in a film as an American au pair. Needless to say, Middletown, Connecticut didn't stand a chance. I stayed in Paris, continuing to work in various capacities on film sets, including François Truffaut's Love on the Run with the great cinematographer Nestor Almendros, which inspired me to tiptoe back to taking photos again with a used Konica camera I had barely ever used. I gave myself no mandate except to find images which had elements of surprise or something unexpectedly theatrical or magical, and it felt right to be shooting again. I eventually returned to the States and continued working in the film industry by day, while developing a new style as an artist, which combined collaged elements of drawing, painting, and photography. Ever present in the images were fragments of nature and botanicals. At about that time, an explosion of exciting postcard art emerged, which replaced the traditional Hallmark greeting card fare. These alternative cards had punchy, artful black graphics and a youthful irreverence. I collected them as inspiration and briefly geared my photo work to it with staged elements. I was encouraged with some positive reactions to the work, but without sufficient confidence to navigate that commercial world, I did not pursue this postcard avenue. Instead, I pivoted to creating fine art versions of this multi-dimensional collage photography process, at first in smaller scale. This predated Photoshop, so everything was cut and pasted by hand. This technique evolved to a new series utilizing deconstructed photos combined with pastels and then rephotographing them as color slides. It was a thrill to pick up the C prints at the lab and see the work in a much larger format. A friend unexpectedly commissioned several new pieces without asking for anything specific. This assignment compelled me to push myself as an artist and be more strategic in my choices, as well as instilling a new sense of confidence in my work. As I continued these hybrid photo collages, I began a new career in fashion, inspired by the graceful glamour of 1930s fashion illustration I'd always admired since I was a little girl and rediscovered in the movies. I used all my savings to launch my own clothing line based on the timeless elegance of this bygone era. I was self-taught and used small quantities of beautiful reclaimed fabrics in natural fibers, not realizing my brand would be later classified as eco-friendly and sustainable. I learned as I went along, and my retro-inspired collection was ultimately sold in over 300 doors across the US and Japan. When I later opened my own storefront, it was necessary to constantly create tempting images to stay top of mind with my customers. Unfortunately, I had no marketing budget. My solution was to step in as the in-house photographer and stylist. Similarly, with limited resource for booking models, I created an avatar for my brand based on a 1920s French Pierrette graphic I had found at a flea market. By then, Photoshop and my trusty painting techniques enabled me to update her, and she took on a life of her own as the timeless French mascot of the label, always wearing my most current designs. In my fashion designs and in the photos, flowers and dots remained a constant inspiration in one form or another. This mysterious and calming power of flowers stayed with me as I concentrated more fully on my art practice and began work on a floral still life series, at first without a clear sense of where I was heading with it. One morning, I unintentionally enlarged one of these photographs too far on my computer, which is what you see on the right. I stared at these untouchable square pixels on the screen and understood I needed to create a new, tangible way of expressing myself as an artist. I remembered George Gershwin once said, "I frequently hear music in the very heart of noise." I recalled the magic of sheet music and how little silent black dots on paper are transformative pathways to beautiful music you can hear. This quote struck me as the perfect reference and inspired me to pursue a visual interpretation of it. My aim was to peel away the unseen magic and beauty in the flowers and keep this notion of a photographic building block. But now, instead of an untouchable digital square, I opted for a tangible object in the form of a more feminine shape, a circle. Using collage and painting techniques, I now had a clear path for the series, which was now titled Deconstructing Beauty. I would print 2 copies of the same image and hand cut individual circles from the second print. I'd then selectively place the circles on top of the first print to capture the invisible pathways and restorative harmonies of the natural world, a little bit like visual music. I began to record natural patterns of scatters and splatters in the world around me to better inform how I placed the dots on my photographs. I wanted the dot placements to appear as organic as possible for each image, and it often took time to get the right balance for the dot applications. Usually this would take a few days to complete, like a long chess game. As my husband observed me move a few dots on Monday or another few on Tuesday just to get it right, I'm pretty sure he thought I had lost my mind. But pretty soon, I had a series of about a dozen images, and I submitted several pieces to the LACP member show, curated by Houston gallerist Catherine Couturier. I was taken by surprise when I was awarded first prize, which landed me a solo show. I included all the scatter and splatter studies in a grid on a separate wall when I exhibited my work, to illustrate how my process was directly inspired by the spontaneous dot placements found all around us. I never intended to sell these images, which were pasted on the wall with frog tape, but it was a nice little bonus when people did. After so many years of being afraid to share my work with the public, I was very nervous before the show. It was amazing to sell over half the images at the opening night reception. That night, fellow LACP artist Charles Miller suggested I consider California native flowers should I decide to pursue a part 2 of the series. I was very intrigued, but became very occupied as I was invited to show the current work in a flurry of galleries across the country. And suddenly COVID appeared and the world shut down forever. Or it changed forever. In those first eerie days of confinement, I began another still life series to distract myself. I gathered disparate objects I found in my house, unified only by color, and assembled them to weave a narrative about past and present day reality. These color studies were based on the formality of a classical still life, yet reflected the unpredictability and chaos of our new normal. With these assemblages, I wanted to portray the kaleidoscope of contrast between the before days and the days of Corona. And this work was also a means to create a sense of order in an increasingly uncertain world. I ended up with a full color spectrum of these non sequitur groupings and was happily surprised when images of this series were juried into gallery exhibitions as well. As I pursued that color study still life series inside my house, I finally returned gingerly outside to my neglected garden. Working in the earth to revive the plants was exceptionally therapeutic. I've since learned that scientific evidence has identified biomes emitted from digging in the dirt stimulate serotonin in your body, which boosts mood and acts as an antidepressant. At the same time, like many people, another way I decompressed from the stress of this sudden isolation was with early morning walks. The streets were so strangely empty. I gravitated to indigenous flowers blooming along the sidewalks, which I had never really noticed before. Somehow, seeing their blossoms bursting near cement offered a symbol of resilience and much needed optimism, a becalming respite from global chaos unfolding almost daily. Now, that earlier suggestion to consider California floros echoed in my head, and the follow-up of the Deconstructing Beauty series fell neatly into place. The 2.0 version is titled Urban Natives and focuses on native California flowers growing on the streets of Los Angeles. Instead of utilizing my earlier controlled studio still lifes technique, I let the elegant grace of different florals flourishing in the streetscapes be my guide. I made sure the background canvas would be either stucco or concrete to underscore the urban context of these florals. I also opted for more minimalist compositions to better highlight the balletic flow of the stems arching hopefully toward the sun. I also consciously scaled back the hand-cut dot placements for this series and applied them more sparingly on the image. I've been refining this Urban Natives series and have paused from exhibiting the work to take the time for the imagery to be properly developed and complete. I'm almost there, I think, and thanks for letting me share the journey with you today. I'm excited to launch it soon, and I really appreciate you all for taking the time to listen to this talk. Before I sign off, I'd like to give a special thanks to the LACP and Aline in particular for creating such a constructive art community and a wonderful educational hub for artists to elevate their practice and operate as professionals. I've learned so much along the way, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Nathalie. That was so amazing. And I hate to, this may sound corny, but you can really connect the dots in your journey from, I mean, one of my favorite images is to see those images of the flowers painted in the small shops outside the bakeries and that are so beautiful. And then you see that appearing in the fabrics of the clothes that you made in your illustrations. And then that moves right into your photography. And I knew when I saw that work that it would be very well received. I mean, your work sort of came at a
Thank you.
time where people had sort of turned away from the idea of making work about beauty. And I think that the buying public is still very interested in having things on their walls that inspire them. And so, congratulations on all that has come your way with that.
Thank you so much. But thanks
Yes.
very much in part to your help and mentoring and guiding me.
Well, my great pleasure. All right, if anyone has any questions for Nathalie, throw them in the Q&A. And one thing you did say that I had a question about is your mother. You mentioned that your mother created hypnotic Higar music.
My grandmother did gypsy swing. She was Hungarian, so
And
she
what
adapted.
is Higar?
It's Cigan is the Hungarian word for gypsy, or
So it was
maybe
Cigan music.
it's gypsy music, Hungarian gypsy music. I should have had a soundtrack. It's pretty fabulous.
Wow, you come from such a creative family. All right, thank you
thanks so
so
much.
much. Wait, I think something just came in. Let me find it. Can't get Q&A to open. Oh, wait, here it is. Oh, someone gave me the correct spelling, Tzigane. And Nathalie, Susan Gordon says, so great to see your evolution. So wanted to pass that on. I very much remember meeting JoAnn for the first time. It was in 2015. She walked into a class that I was about to teach at the Santa Fe workshops and was considering joining the class. And I thought, oh no, she is so talented, has such a resume. I'm really scared of her. I don't know if I can, if I'm worthy of teaching her.
Oh my God.
But what came of that is you are one of the most humble, generous, just a stellar human being. And I'm so lucky to have you in my life. And I am so thrilled to have you share your story and journey tonight. JoAnn Carney began her life in photography with a degree in theater and friends who worked in advertising. They were all young and spoke the same visual language. So she began doing advertising photography, which she always thought of as a split second of a one-act play. She got along well with art directors with whom she worked, and they became lifelong friends who encouraged her to work on her own projects. One of those projects, her projects about hands, was chosen for the portfolio show at the Center of Fine Art Photography in Fort Collins, Colorado. Her work has been in group exhibitions at the Art Institute of Chicago and the Museum of Contemporary Photography. A project that she did for Crate and Barrel was chosen by the Museum of Modern Art for its archive of advertising photography. That is really an incredible achievement. Your work is now history. She divides her time between the darkroom in New Mexico, which I got a chance to see and is quite spectacular, and her lightroom in Central Illinois, where she is working on a book about the 450 people who live in Elkhart, Illinois. Welcome, JoAnn. It's a thrill to have you this evening.
Thank you. As you all know, I'm JoAnn Carney, and I am an artist. And today I'm going to share my work with you. But before I do, I want to say thank you to LACP and Kevin and Janice, especially for putting up with this and going through all of this with us. And just what a wonderful venue it is. to be able to support so many artists and connect them. And of course, I have to give a special thank you to Aline Smithson, who is an amazing mentor and friend. And she is an indefatigable champion for all of her students. And she encourages us always to form a group so we have a safe place to show our work. And that's an amazing gift. So thank you, Aline, for that. As a photographer, I've had the wonderful opportunity, I'm trying to get myself away from this. Oh, well. I've had the opportunity to show at several places, which Aline already told you, so I won't. But what I want to do is start with an axiom or two axioms of art that I feel are very important. One is, and the audience probably knows all of this, but anyway, one is that you have to give yourself permission to be an artist. No one else can do it. And that's hard for me to accept. So that's why I bring it up. And the other thing is that no idea is born in a vacuum, that everything is influenced by something before it. So now here's my influence, my story. I wish I could get rid of, okay. Anyway, my parents were two motherless teens from immigrant families who met at the Mary Garden Ballroom in Chicago. It must have been a very popular ballroom because it was just above the Belmont L stop, but also because it sponsored marathon dancing, which drew crowds for both participation and for audience. The prize shortly after the Depression was $1,000, and people danced for days and days because of that. My mother, who is the person in the middle, loved to dance, but her mother died when she was about 7 years old, and she spent much of her life in the county hospital with one illness or another. She left high school after her second year and went to beauty school. And I think because she didn't have a mother, she didn't really know how to be a mother. So she was an amazing mother in unusual ways. My siblings and I are full of stories about her. One thing, she was way ahead of her time when it came to food, because our dinner would consist of rice and broccoli, just rice and broccoli, or maybe just broccoli. And she never believed in dessert. So as the mother of 6 children, she never drove a station wagon. She always drove a convertible. And she considered herself to be people smart, which meant that she was intuitive, and most of all, she was empathetic. She was empathetic. Our house was a mecca. I shouldn't say mecca. Our house was a meeting place for all the people in the neighborhood, all the children in the neighborhood. We would raise the shade in the morning and there would already be kids waiting on the outside the porch. She cleaned infections and cut hair and taught dancing and just general things that she did for people. I'm trying to think of, oh, and she pulled teeth. That was one thing she did. Okay, my father was the third of 4 children, and he grew up in an orphanage until his older sister was old enough, was 16, and she left the orphanage and took her brothers and sisters with her and became a sort of surrogate mother. He had a sense of humor that was clever, but not unkind. And he hated it when people were hurt or taken advantage of. And he hated seeing movies that were sad or had an apocalyptic ending. My mother, on the other hand, loved movies, and she let her children take a nap after school and stay up late to watch the late night movie. And our father often came home in the middle of the movie bearing a treat of a midnight snack. But he would look at her and say, "Damn, you look good." And I suppose that's why there were so many of us. In her long chestnut-colored hair days, she channeled Ava Gardner, But when she cut her hair and made it blonde, she became Lana Turner. She never stopped dancing or teaching dancing. And I'm not so sure, though, that my father loved to dance. But on cue, he would dance with her. And if they would do the rumba, people would clear the floor and just watch them dance. Neither of them, to their credit, ever gave the impression that daughters were any less capable of things than sons. In fact, that was the case with them. But like all parents, I think they had an idea of what they thought their children would be. My mother thought I would be a nightclub singer, and my father thought I would be the CEO of General Motors, which shows a big difference in them. But they instructed us to find something that we love to do and to pursue it and not worry about making a living, because that would come. And in fact, all 6 of us have followed that. We all do something that we love. So here I am, the firstborn. I feel that this photograph is very funny because my mother and I would follow my father, who was a pilot in the Air Force, and we would stay somewhere near his base in an apartment. But the most significant picture of that time is this one. This picture, when I saw it a few years after it was made, convinced me that, for me anyway, memories are tied to photographs. I remember very well going up and down the stairs at the bridge in San Antonio while my mother and her sister talked. And in fact, years later, I was working on a project for Motorola, and it was in San Antonio. So I made sure I got to the bridge to see if my memory was the same. And it was. I could find that bridge, and I remembered going up and down, and it was like being 3 years old again. Let's see. In high school, I wanted to be a math teacher or a missionary and photograph all the people that I would meet while I was a missionary. In college, I started as a math major, but 2 weeks after I got into college, I had an notice to try out for the play Annie, Get Your Gun. So I auditioned, and from then I was in theater from then on. And it was a great theater department at Loyola because there were some wonderful teachers, and it was small enough so everybody worked a lot. And most of us are still in theater in one form or another. Before I graduated, though, I met another actor who was a very handsome young man named Bob Carney. And we married and had 2 wonderful little daughters who luckily inherited his eyelashes. When Elizabeth was first born, I taught myself how to sew and started making little simple dresses for her. She was an adorable little model, as you can see from her baby scrapbook. And then when Susie was born, I decided I would make a mail order business of all these little dresses that I was making. But I needed photographs. And so I had to learn how to process my own film. And this picture is the reason why. Normally, up till this time, I would take my film to the drugstore and it would come back mostly printed on #1 paper. So it was all gray and white. But when I had this picture reprinted, it came back like this. And I looked at it and I thought, printing matters. So I decided that I had to learn how to print so I could make nice photographs for my mail order business. Luckily, there was a place in Chicago called the Darkroom. Joe Rowley and John Butch, who started the Darkroom, were way ahead of their time when it comes to workshops. There were classes in photography and in darkroom work. There was a studio and a gallery that had shows every month from some prominent photographers. It was open 7 days a week, from early in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. And after hours, many of us would sit around and talk till the last of us went home. There were people in the darkroom preparing for art shows, gallery shows. There were some photojournalists who were getting their contacts ready to submit. There were wedding photographers, and there were 2 photographers who were publishing a paper of rock and roll photography. And there were photographers who tested and never really made a print at all. I was so excited when I first saw that picture come up in the developing machine, the developer, that I never got over it. It still thrills me to this day when I go into my darkroom. One day, a young photographer who'd already been quite established came in and asked Joe Rowley if he knew anyone who could assist him. And Joe said, "Could it be a woman?" And Mark said, "I guess so." So Joe called me out of the darkroom and introduced me. And Mark said, "Can you load a Hasselblad?" And I said, "What's a Hasselblad?" And he said, "Oh, I think we better meet at 6. And that began 2 years of working together. And it was a very good relationship. I think advertising photography, the way I was able to experience it, was unique. And I appreciate that I had that opportunity. Right about the time that I started working with Mark, Bob and I, both the oldest of 6 children, realized that we would be better off separated. So we did, but we had a very compatible divorce, and we are still friends to this day. He introduced me, though, to a friend of his who became my friend as well, an art director by the name of Tom Shortledge. Tom, at the time, was just starting out as the chief art director for a company that was brand new called Crate and Barrel. He asked me to do an ad for a product called Marimekko Fabrics, which was a line of clothing and fabrics that they had. And so I did the ad, and if I made a mistake or it wasn't right, he would tell me why, and I'd do it again. So it was like a portfolio review. In those beginning years, I had that great experience, that great gift of doing things and having immediate feedback. But besides Tom, as time went on, there were several other art directors I worked for. One of them was this was a project for Encyclopedia Britannica, and the headline was, remember when you wanted to live in the library? Well, we chose the location, and I had all the film and lighting in the van, and I walked in to the library at the Lake Forest Academy, and that's what the light looked like. I was so excited. I called the little girl who was the model, and we got her dressed, and I put her in that light because light was going to change, and this was too good. So we did a couple of rolls, and that was it. I never took anything out of the van except the camera and film. The next thing is a project I did for McDonald's. I did a lot of work for an advertising agency called Burrell. This little girl was so adorable, but she was just about 2, and that made it pretty iffy if it would work. So we hired an alternate, but I couldn't get anything. I had shot 10 frames in the Hasselblad, and then finally I said, "Go sit on that chair and hold that Happy Meal." And she ran to it, grabbed it. That was the 11th frame. There is no 12th. And that ran so many times that McDonald's loved it and used it again and again. This ad was done for Jen Eyre, and we did a lot for Jen Eyre long before Photoshop, so we had to actually build sets. This French country kitchen set was so wonderful in the studio. I think I kept it up for about, I don't know, a month. Speaking of being things before Photoshop, another artist that I worked with as an art director was Derek Norman. We did a whole series on Northern Telecom, all of which was with a white background, which was easy to do on a cyc in the studio, but we had to do it with the DC-10 engine. And the only one we could find, United let us use it, was in Milwaukee between 2 and 5 in the morning on an icy cold February night. So this wall, because it wasn't Photoshop, the entire engine had to be wrapped in white sweet paper and held by very resourceful and adventuresome assistants who are now all doing art photography rather than advertising photography. The last ad I'm going to show you is the project that I did with Tom for the opening of the store Crate and Barrel in New York when it finally opened. This ad had 8 pages in the New York Times Sunday magazine. It was on bus kiosks in half of the city and on the sides of buses. And that was the one that we got a note that the Museum of Modern Art took it into their archives, which was pretty exciting. So after a while, I met Bill Drake, who became my muse and who taught me everything I did not learn because I didn't go to art school. We traveled all over the world, and he agreed. We went to all museums and architectural sites, but the best thing, he agreed to carry with me suitcases full of Polaroid film because I wanted to photograph people. And as soon as I would start photographing somebody and give them a Polaroid, I'd have lots and lots of people. And after Polaroid was killed, we would take a small printer and I would say to the people, what did I say? Suratrato, mira, aquí, mañana, su trésor, which is, I hope, Spanish for meet me here tomorrow. And I would go home and process and print, or go into Photoshop and print all of the film and bring it back, the little prints, to the people the next day. And it was wonderful. They would bring me little things like a little shrine that they built, or a couple of oranges or something like that. Now, this is the first project that is kind of current for me that I'm going to talk about. This is my faceless portraits. These portraits are a story of what we tell through our hands. My mother suffered arthritis when she was very, very young, rheumatoid arthritis, which made it impossible for her to open a door or tie a bow. And we wanted to help, but we didn't want to make her feel that we were impatient. So we just watched and waited. I never thought about photographing her hands. I don't know if she would have agreed if I had, but since she lost her battle with arthritis, I have photographed and made portraits of hands of many people that I met. Hands reveal more than we say. In many ways, they show who we are. They speak when we don't, and they carry with them the life that they have lived. I've been encouraged by their strength and their individuality, and saddened by their pain. Now I'm watching my own hands and the hands of people I love, and I'm watching how they change and how we have to accept the change as we age. When I asked a person to photograph their hands, I would say to them, just put your hands together in front of you. Billy's godson came by shortly after he broke up with his girlfriend, and I asked John if he would let me photograph his hands. He took his gloves off and put his hands over his heart. And to me, that was such a poignant gesture from him, and it really told the story. And for those of us who knew Theo Raven, this is a picture, of course, of her hands. The next thing I'm going to show you is a project I've been working on called Waking Dreams. When I was about 9, I had terrible nightmares and couldn't get over them for days. But during COVID, even though I was happy to be isolated with Billy in our little yellow house, it was I was anxious because I couldn't see my daughters and sisters and all the people in my family that I really missed and wanted to see. And the nightmares returned. I decided that in order to stop them, I would wake up in the morning and dispel the feelings of them by photographing the first things that I saw. So this is a series of pictures that were done within 10 minutes of waking up. I had to make a photograph of things that I saw first, and I wanted it to be positive. I wanted there to be light in every one of them. And I hope that my pictures are a conduit from my experiences to yours, that there's a common ground between us that only needs to be explored. And that if you or I go back to see it another time, the experiences that we've had since that time will cause us to see it in a fresh new way. I'm going to only show you a few pictures from this series because Mono no Naware for me means be awake within the fleeting moment. I like to hold the image of the moment, make it solid, and protect the sensations of what I feel. So the image becomes a memory. I think of each one of these and how poignant they are because of how fragile life is. It's important to me to use photography to come to terms with who I am now. And I like to make portraits that are clean. I like to photograph trees in the winter when their anthropomorphic shape is not obliterated by their leaves and the movement of them. I like to photograph people with plain background so that a person who is seeing the photograph is not distracted by clues to the environment. I feel it's only by looking at someone can you really see them. And I see that moment when the person I'm photographing looks deeply into the lens and sees herself. I want to thank you all for listening to this and letting me share my pictures with you, as nervous as I am. So thank you.
Thank you so much, JoAnn. Oh, those last, the Mono no Aware images, so spectacular. I hope you continue to add to that series. Really, it was a wonderful talk and lots of nuggets of good thinking and philosophy in your talk. So do we have any questions? I'll ask, what are you most interested in working on right now? I mean, you're probably still a little bit restricted in, you know, where you can make work, but.
Well, actually, this little town that Billy grew up in, where we have our little yellow house, as I call it, has 450 people that live in it. And I've been going to it for about 30 years. And I've been photographing farm sales and christenings and funerals and portraits of people through the years. And it's been very interesting. And I couldn't limit it to about 8 or 10 pictures for this. So I'm making a book and I hope that will be finished pretty soon. I had one of the people who live there, who's another of Billy's cousins, built me a moon, and I've been photographing people around this moon, and it's fun to see. I have one picture is of a little boy who was 12, and then there's a picture of him with his little baby, and that's it. It's pretty exciting to me, but I didn't want to put it in this talk.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to see that when it's ready. Okay, you have a few comments here. Peter Kagan says, beautiful presentation. You did great. And Suzanne C says, are you planning on doing more of the mono-aware images? And I think she is smart to ask that question because they are quite spectacular.
Thank you. Yes, I am. Yes, the answer is yes. I have quite a few of them, but I'm continuing with that for sure.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We ran over a little bit tonight, but it doesn't matter because we are now filled up with amazing art and photography. And Barbara and Natalie, you can come back on. Really, thank you all for such a amazing evening. And isn't it wonderful that photography, each one of you makes such very different work, but it has given you a second, or in Barbara's case and in Natalie's case, or maybe JoAnn's, a third or fourth language to talk about your life and the things that matter to you or the things that inspire you. So we are really lucky, and thank you all for such a wonderful evening. So
Thank
I think that is
Thank
it.
you.
Take good
Thank you.
care, everyone, and we'll see you back in a few weeks for our final Artist Talk series, and I hope you can join us. And I hope that you go to the gala, and I hope that you buy some items at the auction. So, all right, take good care. Have a wonderful evening.